We really regret and oppose the academization of social justice movements. First of all, because academia is broken. I'm going to explain this in two ways. First of all, I'm going to talk about how knowledge production takes place in academia and why that is fundamentally opposed to being like prominent in social justice movements. Secondly, I will explain why the structures or the rituals or expectations that are set in academia are particularly bad for the growth of social justice movements. Thirdly, I will also talk about why the credibility that these academics or academic terminology is given causes problems, and why it's the credibility is given is unwarranted. Now let's begin with why academia is broken. First of all, when we are talking about academic stuff and we are doing it for a scientific purpose, we rely on technical language with precision. So when we are saying, when I'm saying sex or gender or race, in each of the cases, I have a particular reason to use it, and I want to do it in a way that engages with the current literature. That's why precision is important, and because I'm doing this as a job as an academic and I want my work to get published, I want to be well known, and I want to have some content to actually send to this academic journal for it to be peer reviewed. I want to find a gap in the literature. So I want to differentiate my subject as much as possible to make sure that I have something to write and present about, because that's what my livelihood depends on. This is an extremely bad incentive for us to have when we want to advance social justice, because to produce knowledge there is extremely slow, and it has particularly academic reasons to be done that way. And the language, therefore, becomes hard to understand, because one way to differentiate yourself is to use this language that sounds academic. So all of these expectations causes problems. What kinds of problems? Like when we say race, or when we say critical race theory, we use this in academia in a very particular way and to engage with the literature. But when some other actors who are non-academic, completely non-academic people who are just ordinary people living their lives, these languages and terminology sound extremely foreign to them, and they are not able to understand or appreciate the particular connotation that it has in academia that doesn't really serve much purpose in regular life. But this really becomes weaponized by people who are opposed to social justice. For example, some conservative people who are opposing it by taking advantage of the foreignness, taking advantage of the differentiation and precision. And also, in academia, sometimes it's important to do theoretical work, and sometimes it's important to do field research and all of those things. But ordinary people don't have any mechanism to differentiate between these either. Therefore, the more the movement is exposed to this kind of terminology, it becomes a problem. Secondly, let's talk about the rituals and structures that is needed to become an academic. Firstly, it's very hierarchical. It requires you to go to a university, which already is expensive in many parts of the world. But also, to say that I'm going to become an academic in 2021 means that you have some sort of safety network, so that you can actually say that I'm going to avoid making money for until I'm 30 or things like that. Those are all reasons that academia really self-selects the people who can make it there. That's why the knowledge produced there is also unsuitable for social justice movements. And it also looks elitist, disconnected from lived experiences. Not that that's always untrue, that's sometimes true, but also for all of the reasons that I've explained to you so far. And that's those rituals, structures don't really prove that the knowledge that you produce is going to be particularly useful or valid or relevant for the lived experiences that suffer from lack of social justice in the world. Who are these people? These people are minorities. These people are people who are mostly disenfranchised and who feel actually some barrier between these academic talks and their own lived experiences. Now, let's look at one final thing, the credibility that being an academic gives. Academia loves titles. It loves actually differentiating between people. And this is warranted in the case of academia because you have proven yourself according to some set standards. But this doesn't mean that your work is going to have validity when it is actually outside of your limited sample of your field research. But this is not the case. This is not how it sounds to ordinary people, right? These people are academics, and so they have these titles, they have these authoritative statements about your lived experiences. What does that result in? What that results in is people feeling like their voices are not being heard, or they themselves have the same experience, but because their language or the ability to express themselves doesn't fit the new expectations of social justice, which is getting increasingly more academic, they feel like their voices don't matter as much. I can take it from CL.
Okay, what do you think about the fact that it's not always true that all minorities disenfranchised? For example, a lot of LGBTQ people are not so disenfranchised, and we think they are also can achieve very high social status.
Of course, there are exceptions to this, but I don't really see how this engages with the structural argument that I gave, which means academia self-selects, and those who are able to get in maybe increasing the minorities, but this doesn't mean that their words or their expectation their words or their experiences have more validity when compared to people who were actually organizing on the ground, convincing people to vote, convincing people to join their association, to sign petitions and let people know, go door to door. These people are not academics, but increasingly their advice becomes more relevant than people who were on the fieldwork. And it is difficult for this not to be weaponized by people who are opposing social justice movements. For all of those reasons, we think, first of all, you are losing a lot of members because they are feeling increasingly divided, divisive, or at least foreign to what this movement has become. And secondly, it increases infighting and radicalization and actually fuels what people who are opposed to social justice are promoting. That's why we are very much proud to propose.
Problem for social movements to have more supporters nowadays is that when people in the middle, those people who are neither liberal or conservative, think of social movements, they don't think of actual goals, they don't think of actual great things that could happen, but they think of crazy people shouting on the streets, going on parade, possibly is going to knocking other people's stores and try to rob them out of their money. This is a precise moment when economist or New Yorker goes onto the street and have an interview with some of the reporters and have some of the protesters and find out that those students are saying this is just fun. We as a government, we as the opposition, I think academicization is necessary. The reason behind this is that, first of all, we think this brings more unified goals for more specific and unified goals for social movements, and we think that is generally a good thing for bringing support and bringing more efficiency in getting development. And second of all, we think this generally leads to better support for social movements because it leads to better persuasion of people in the middle and those people who are even conservative. Well, our stance will be very simple. We support the academization in every way that happens in the exactly like the status quo, where different universities or different academic institutions have different researchers competing in the academia. What is the actual theory? What is the actual reason behind certain structural problems, and what is the right solution to it? We're also happy to go on with it, go exactly like the status quo, where there is a strict banning in providing obviously discriminative findings that are neither scientific nor supported, like how Black African Americans can be intrinsically more stupid than white Americans, or how females should be intrinsically kept down the social ladder. Now, before I move on with my constructive speech, several clarification or rebuttals to the Prime Minister. If you look at the OG's case, there is a severe contradiction happening in their case. That contradiction is they talk about those professors, those researchers doing academicization of social justice movements, wanting for reputation, whereas they're also talking about how these professors are likely to produce results that are both costly and unpractical. This is a precise moment we say that those professors are not going to get any reputation at all at the end of the day. But the structural rebuttal to this point is that first of all, they see that there's going to be, first of all, out of academicization, out of academia, there will be hard jargons, thus people won't understand and won't support it. The reason behind this we think won't likely to happen is, first of all, those jargons we see oftentimes about social justice movements are not that hard to understand. When people look at first wave, second wave feminism in literature studies, people know that this is feminism in different times and referring to different problems that females have faced in histories. When people look at the term of police brutality, racial profiling, people know that this is those actual violence police committed to certain racial minorities, especially with all those kind of comedians like John Oliver or economists making those easy understanding videos on YouTube. We don't think those hard jargons are going to be very difficult for people to understand. Second of all, they talk about how this is going to be costly. First of all, we tell you being costly should not be a clash within this debate. Why is that the case? Is the comparative of this whole academicization is costly is that the whole academia spending no money at all on the study of social movement. That is in and of itself not a good thing, we think. And second of all, we don't think those actual results provided by the academia will be in and of itself unpractical. The reason behind this is exactly pointed out by the Prime Minister is because those professors want to be reputational. They have the incentive to create critical reports, the ones who invented the critical race theory, so that they get their name published everywhere, being considered as a significant contributor to racial justice or to gender equality. We say very likely that those researchers, when the actual academicization happens, have a strong incentive to make their research as practical as possible with supported data and solid data at the end of the day. That is why we say the case of GovSci doesn't actually stand at the end of the day. What are we going to tell you for opening opposition? First of all, why this brings more specific goals for social movement. We think this is going to bring more specific goals for social movement out of two reasons. First of all, we think the sphere of academia is going to bring a more universal guidelines and more objective metrics and actual social movement happening in real life. What does this mean? This means that when a certain professor want a certain theory being posted, want a certain study, analysis of certain reasons why certain minority is being oppressed, what is the actual solution for it, that group of professors, that group of researchers have to go through all kinds of objective data that's going to be able to be solid enough to make the academic journals. Unlike what we are witnessing in social movements, like in Me Too movements or in actual Black Lives Matters in life, or the actual movement of Black Panther Party, what's the likely image to happen is that people are going to see that different people going onto the street shouting about the injustice that they have suffered and asking for changes in vague terms such as gender equality, breaking the glass ceiling, and everything. We think the first benefits of this is that academicization brings that a more unified metric. And second of all, we think this metric can also be universal, given the fact that most academia doesn't require the scientists only to publish in their own country, but being able to be tested by researchers in other countries, like researchers in Europe, researchers in Southeast Asia. We think this is very likely to provide universal guidelines for different questions. I'll take one from CG if there's anything.
Yeah. People from past generations still exist. Therefore, the underlying issues can be told by them. I don't see how academics uniquely contribute to us understanding past issues.
Yes, it would, because academia is able to provide a more universal guidelines based on different studies of people's problem. It's not like it's going to look at people's problem and say nothing about it. It's just don't have different people shouting on the streets what the individual problem is. It provides a more universal problem. Yes, it's going to vary from individual to individual, but this problem will be shared by more people. We think generally that is a good thing. Moving on, we think this leads to three benefits. First of all, this leads to unity within the social movements. Unlike the current status quo, we're going going to see tens of, even thousands of branches within Black Lives Matter, within the feminist movement, talking about what is exactly the right thing for female to do. We think academia brings better goals and better unity within social movements, as we're seeing the major conflict within the academia tends to be usually 2 or even 5 branches at least, like the choice feminism or lenient feminism. We think this generally brings more unity for social movement. And second of all, we think this prevents the instrumentalization of social movement by politicians, coercing politicians to have to say something instead of saying that we support homosexuals. My partner will further explain how that could happen. Very proud to oppose.
Hi everyone. After two quick pieces of rebuttal, I'll be talking about mainly A, why does this make us look in the eyes of the people who we are trying to recruit, why social movements social justice movements are trying to recruit comparatively, because I'll be talking about those people. You are competing for those people with far rights, for example, and I'll be explaining why, and why far rights tactics are much more effective than yours. Then I'll be talking about and extending the debate, I'll be talking about how it harms the academy as well, which is highly problematic, and I'll be talking about why. Two pieces of rebuttal. A, they are saying that, oh, it's not that hard to understand. We think it's hard to understand. For example, when you hear the word subaltern, what do you really understand? When you hear things like women as positionality, but not as biologically, what do you understand when you hear spectrum? We believe that those are words that are being commonly used, and they literally mean nothing for someone who didn't get academic education or got academic education somewhere outside of social studies. Also, Dida is telling you that such studies are quite intertextual. So they refer to each other all the time. Without getting the basics, you can't understand them further. So they aren't responding this to, they are not responding this at all. Thirdly, Dida is telling you the movement is very slow. All those articles are trying to prove very little nuances, and you are probably unable to understand that. Secondly, we believe that academic skepticism is really high, and they are not responding to this at all. I'll be explaining why academic skepticism is likely to raise, and all their argument is based on that people are seeing the protesters as an angry mob, and such academicians bring them prestige. I'll be talking about why it is the exact opposite. Coming to my first argument, so comparing why it enforces people to move to far right as opposed to social justice movements, because we believe that people now don't believe that there is the middle ground. In the classical theories, in the middle ground, people saw that it brings crisis, the inequality is rising, so they are looking for a new answer, right? They are bored of the old answers, so they are bored of the system. They are trying to bring figures outside of the system, like Trump or Sanders, right? So we believe that the people are going to the extremes. Why are you likely to lose people to far right instead of social justice movements if you academize? At least more likely to lose people if you academize social movements. Three reasons why. A, alongside with Idar's argument concerning why it makes you seem elitist. Why does it make you seem elitist? Because of two reasons. A, you are probably likely to shame people who aren't into theory, right? Even if you don't shame, you constantly use words like, for example, mansplaining, or you'll be using other very technical words, and you assume that you all know these, right? But those people will not be able to ask you because they'll be afraid of being shamed, because in certain cases they will be shamed. They'll be, for example, misgendering a person, and you'll be shaming that, you'll be telling that this is awful, and he or she will be probably feeling quite bad, right? So or like because you'll be referring to an article and most of you have read it, but that person didn't, right? So we believe that this person is likely to say, okay, I don't belong here. Secondly, this person will look a working class person, for example, who is doing the talking. Is it a working class person? No, in most of the cases, because you're an academician, you'll be doing the talking, right? Because you know it better and so on. And he or she will be saying, okay, this isn't in line with my lived experience. This is not what I've been experiencing, right? So we believe that you will feel silence inside those groups. And thirdly, we believe that those people you'll be feeling are not talking about you too. They are talking about some abstract theories. And what are the problems of those theories? We believe those theories are often quite structural. What do I mean? They often despise agency. They say that there are structures that are above us that we cannot change. So as a person, as a unique agent, you are likely to feel belittled, and you are likely to feel to be the outside of the debate. But to far right, they explain you that you are unique. They explain you they need you. They make people like you talk. They talk in the language you have. So you are likely to feel closer to them before moving on.
Yes, why if we have to rely on the conclusion provided by academics to like pursue specific policies, then why under your side of policy you can achieve more effective and efficient social movement?
Because people have the everyday experience. Also, we aren't silencing the academicians, right? They can listen to them from the TV, they can read their articles. We are opposing academicians directly being integrated to the movement and them being important parts of it. Secondly, they all want you to believe that it gives us a more unified purpose. Right? This makes no sense because academia is the most divided place in the world. What academicians do is opposing each other, right? They are giving you hundreds of different ways, more radical, more everyday sense of theories, right? What academicians do is disagree with each other. So you are more likely to find a unique way, more likely to find a collective way without the academicians. What the far right do is that they are very clear, and there is a man mostly who says we'll be doing this, and they see this as a clear and planned path instead of a very divided place of discussion, right? We see this highly problematic because people tend to align with clear plans. Finally, far right seems to be talking about your everyday experience, your pain, economy, and so on. But theoreticians and academicians are seen like utopians. They are talking about theory which you don't mainly understand. So they are seen as outside of life. They are seen as they have been thinking in their ivory towers. So what you are losing? Hey, you are losing the working class you need the most, because without them, you can't pressure governments, right? And you are losing to your worst enemy, which is making the things much worse. This group is particularly important because you are trying to change their lives, and also they are the unique group that can pressure governments because they are close to them and because they are high in numbers. What happens to the academia? Now people are being much more skeptical about academia, right? Now they are seen as agents of the social movements. What does this lead? This leads to classes being much more politicized, right? This leads to academicians not having enough time to do their studies. This leads to people not listening to them. And we think that it leads to people indoctrinating their children against the beliefs, right? So we believe that in the other case, people were likely to believe academicians when they listen to them on TV and so on, but you are discrediting academia as well. So thank you for listening to me.
Judge, we think the biggest mistake that the OG is making here is that they fail to recognize in a world where a lot of people, even in developing countries, already get the basic idea about social equality for females, for LGBT groups. The more important thing is about how to actually push for real and specific changes rather than still emphasizing on the existence of problems and the existence of awareness. That's why we think that the exact academicization of those political justice movement can bring more effective and push for more like actual changes around the status quo to bring protections and benefits to the minorities at the end of the day. That is the most important thing in this debate. And we haven't heard anything from the entire government side talking about how exactly under their side of house they can achieve, for example, protection for sexual harassments for female in business, or get more female politicians to get quota in the Senate or in the House of Representatives, etc. And that is the thing that we want to do as the opening opposition. So basically, two things in my speech. First of all, I'm going to finish the argument that my partner has left. That is to say, talking about why under our side of house we can more likely to hold politicians accountable by providing specific agendas to their party lines and ask them to actually stick to those agendas as their promise. And secondly, how under our side of house we generally get more support for social movements by the de-radicalization and also like more persuasion towards those people who are already skeptical in the status quo. But for that, several rebuttals to the previous speaker. So first thing that they mentioned is that under our side of house, we make those kind of things that are elitist, that people cannot actually like talk about it, or they will be silenced, they are very afraid of shaming. We do recognize that is true in certain fields, for example, in the certain kind of discussion that happens, but we also have to recognize that this is already like minor cases. There's not happening so often. Exactly as my partner has already pointed out, there are talk show shows that actually telling people what are specific meaning of specific terms. You have even seen in the TikTok, there are like people explaining what exactly is male gaze and what exactly how it is detrimental to the female group, etc. That's all the already existence. Sorry. That's exactly what we hear in the status quo, and that's exactly what we can get to get those people understand those things at the end of the day. And secondly, they accuse of us is actually under our side of house, we actually silence people, or we do not let people having representation. This is also absurd because exactly how researchers do their research is to actually go out and ask what people think of their problems, what are the root cause, and they get all forms of data and analyze it. That's why you see that all forms of papers that academics actually publish in their research, they are all forms of example that used as very specific things to prove their model at the end of the day. That's why people's voice will be heard in a more rational way that is proving how exactly it is detrimental to their life and how people should offer protections. That's why people's representation is still preserved under our side house. Moving on to my constructives. So how exactly under our side house we are more likely to hold politicians accountable? Because in the status quo, what is happening is only, for example, like Biden promised that we will support female, we will support LGBT, and this is what exactly also happens to Trump. Trump, in his in all his speeches, in all his rallies, he say that I support feminism, I love LGBT, etc. But the difference is actually Biden actually committed to those kind of push for legislation that protects LGBT among armies or among all forms of social aspects. He supported specific policies that he actually write in his speeches as promised that we will do those things at the end of the day. But what we hear exactly from Trump is all those broad goals, but not specific policy. If we are going to push academicization of social justice movement even further, they are more likely to actually even hold Republican politicians, all those conservative politicians that exist in those European countries to actually achieve certain social equality by actually committing to specific social goals rather than generally supporting the idea of equality just to get votes for themselves. This is how we hold politicians accountable. Impacts of this is, first of all, we are going more likely to push for efficient and specific policies that can actually protect those minorities being harmed in the status quo. And secondly, it is exactly under our support, we can get those politicians to actively to reach this kind of bipartisan bills to actually to try to keep their promise rather than keep fighting each other with their speeches, but do not actually do real things at the end of the day. So that is how we hold politicians accountable. So second thing under our house is how exactly under our house that we can generally get more support from this kind of social movement. But for that, I want to take PRI from OG for engagement.
Okay,
Look, we already tell you that non-academic activists are perfectly experienced to like persuade people or organize like events, but academics aren't trained to do this beyond the limited like field research they did for their doctoral thesis.
We do recognize that is true, but we do think that what we believe is true, as already explained, that the academic ideas or academic jargon not just actually enter society and being told to people. There's another filter here. The filter is called YouTube. The filter is called TikTok, in which those people explain to others in simple terms that what is actually true. So it's not contradictory in this case. It exactly exists in the status quo. Those kind of explanation do exist. So secondly, about our mechanism to gather more support to get more support for social movement. Basically, two things. First of all, how exactly we de-radicalize people, because what we see in the status quo are exactly those minorities that are already being triggered by social injustice. For example, after Floyd instance, that a lot of people actually go on the street to trash stores to think that is a form of demonstration. But this is exactly how radicalization or populist for the lab looks like. But on the other side, after having so-called elitist, exactly elitist, as mentioned by the previous speaker, what we get is specific analysis about how to stop police brutality and racial profiling, and that is more efficient and that is more likely to persuade in like swing voters to actually to support you rather than trash stores and even irritate more people at the end of the day. The second thing is directly attacking at those kind of propaganda that is already initiated by the right wing, this kind of intellectuals or politicians such as Jordan Peterson that keep talking about why we have too much inequality and why the structural problems do not exist. By having more specific analysis about structural problems against female LGBT and all other minorities, then we can disprove them exactly wrong. Even what we hear from the government side is true. The point still stands that we are fighting against propaganda and advertisement from the far right to persuade people why they shouldn't support such far right movements. If we lose the academic grounds, we lose support at the end of the day. Based on that, very proud to oppose.
We'd like to thank that speaker for the final speech. We now invite the member of government to extend the case for side government. Hear, hear.
Yeah, hi. In 3, 2, 1. First, let's analyze the claims coming out of opening opposition. They have two main claims. Firstly, that the data of these underlying issues helps create better policies because politicians have an incentive to listen to these academics. Number two, they say that when such theories are brought in, I think that better solves the issues of like these minorities. Firstly, I don't think that gathering data matters because notice people from past generations still exist. Therefore, there is anecdotal evidence. The response we get in POI is that basically that they can gather that data in one place. I don't see how the data will be used properly because notice some of the data already exists. I think there is ample data to say that blacks have been denied things like loans from the government, have been structurally segregation, I think that data still exists. The question is, will politicians act on it? And if we prove to you that politicians don't act on it, we take that clash away from this debate. Why do I think that politicians will never act on what academics mention? Because notice, politicians matter the most about people's opinion. I think academics live in a small niche spaces of their own. I think OG has told you why that happens. But notice, we're going to take that argument one step further and tell you that these niche spaces are often not tapped in by politicians, right? Because most politicians are busy in seeing how they can increase their support, right? For example, tweeting or using social media to their advantage or holding public rallies. I don't see any reason coming as to why politicians will be more inclined to listen to these academics, because notice these academics are often in niche spaces, and hence the politicians will likely not gain popularity by supporting these academicians, right? On the counterfactual, probably the politician would get more popularity by, for example, supporting a celebrity or like endorsing something, right? That will gain them more popularity. And politicians have a re-election incentive, hence care about this popularity. Number two, I think it's I think most of the populist leaders in the world are anyways opposed to academics. For example, Trump literally fired Fauci in the middle of a pandemic, which means that most of the leaders, especially like conservative leaders in the Western liberal democracy, as well as leaders in the developing nations, don't believe in academics, because firstly, they most of these politicians in developing nations aren't educated and hence don't understand the importance of these things. But B, I don't think they have an incentive to listen to these academics. I've proved to you that mostly they go into these niche spaces, which means that I don't see any incentive for the politicians, or rather, even if the incentive happens, they never provide any mechanisms. I'm going to first weigh, and this is the first contribution, the rebuttal, but the second contribution coming from me is that what are the, because all of OG's claims to be true, they had to, these incentives of these academics are likely to, the actions of these academics are likely to happen in such way. Oh, I'll take you later. Firstly, I think that the incentive of these academics is to conduct research of the movement, right? For example, what are the demographics, for example, who currently attend the feminist movement, or what is the age group, etc. Number three, I think they join these movements for publicity as well, because now they can get into even more liberal spaces by telling that, oh, I have they have gone to these movements, etc. But number three, I think and this is the weighing metric, I think the issues that will be prioritized in even the data that these academicians gather will be mainstream. Why is that true? Because notice, mainstream issues of the social justice movement get more following and more media publicity. That is to say that the issues that will be prioritized by in the opening government's world by these academicians while gathering data will be things mainstream things which go on TV. They'll not be going ahead and interviewing females who have been highly oppressed or females who have been outcasted. Rather, they're going to interview females who are from the rich and privileged background. And the reason for this is that once you start interviewing these people who have mainstream issues, to give you an example, for example, in India, females face a lot of issues, right? One of the issues could be females are being denied jobs, right? The other issue is far more important. For example, female forced labor in unregulated industry. Notice that academicians are far more likely to focus on these mainstream issues like pregnancy leaves and things like contraception. Pregnancy leave inside offices and wage gap, etc., while completely ignoring the far majority of the lived experiences of a lot of the minority chunk of the female. Why is this problematic? I think firstly, because even in their best case, the data they gather are going to be of mainstream issues. But number two, I think some of the ideas with the social justice movements raise are going to be completely ignored. Why is this extremely harmful and principally unjustified? The reason why it's principally unjustified is because A, social justice movement focus on the principle of reparation. The principle states that the reparation should be done and the benefits of the movement should go to only those who have been oppressed. We told you as to how there is a perverse incentive of these academicians to gain publicity. Therefore, the principle of this is against the principle of reparation. The number two is that we must always focus on the minor, like even in the social justice movement, we should focus on the minorities. But before that, I'll take OO.
Yes, if the data is not comparative enough, it doesn't make the paper. And the principle of reparation is an academic jargon. And do you consider debate as an academicization of social justice movement? If no, why? If yes, why is it harmful?
Okay, that's too long of an like POF answer. I'll just like answer the first question, which I forgot because it was too long. I like say debate, it matters. It like debates. Most of these academicians will be like indulging in like debates on this TV channel, which will completely take off what actual core issue is, and they'll be like debating in like something which gains them publicity. I don't know what happens. Why that's beneficial, right? Okay. We told you that firstly, it's principally unjustified because reparations should be only going to the people who have been oppressed. We told you how the incentive of these academicians are perverse. But number two, we have shown you that within these movements, the minority of the females or the worst of stakeholders, even in the like the hierarchy of the feminist movement, these worst of females don't get the benefits because now like the debate or the like academics or the data that goes out as opening oppositions claim are likely to be of the females who are going to be comparatively richer. The reason why we must not care about them is because they are the minority of the movement and have no other like way to defend themselves. Therefore, we must care about the like the most vulnerable stakeholders even within this movement. We told you how that's not possible on op side. Vote CG.
Of like social justice movements is just like making social justice movement as a university. It's like when you want to give some opinion, you have to first make a thesis, you first need to like write some papers, or you need to give a list of reference for it. We don't think so. We don't think like there is gonna be like so much disagreement as in academia, as in this like socialized, academized social justice movements. We think academization in social justice movements is just like using some like terminology that is widely accepted. For example, alienation by capitalism in like anti-capitalism movements, or reparation in like Black Lives Matter movements, or sexualization or male gaze in feminism movements. We think that those opinions are generally acceptable and accepted by the social justice movement, and reject the characterization that they're going to be like scholars with bad incentive, because we think scholars also need to be like peer reviewed. So there's also counter incentive for other scholars to like rebut this like thesis, and we think they also need to be published, which means that there's gonna be like legit peer review. So we don't think this is a problem. So we have 3 points that we want to present to you. Why this like academization is like the best approach to all those like social justice movements. And second point, why we think like this would actually increase the bond inside this like minority group. And we think this would actually help people to understand like how and why they're exploited. And third point, why do we think that this like academization would make this social justice movement more appealing to the general public? So first of all, ladies and gentlemen, why do we think this is the best approach? Because we think for like social justice movement, for example, for Black Lives Matter, it's so important to understand the history of how African Americans are exploited like in the United States. And so we think that there's like a direct response to that history. For example, the means of reparation. We think for LGBTQ, it's so important for the general public to understand why and how would this group of minority see themselves, or how this group of minority is formed. Or we think like it's so important because like we think when people are discriminated, it's very important to understand the history. It's because only by understanding the history would we understand why they're discriminated in the past, and what policy can we exactly do to reparate this like history of discrimination. We think firstly, we think it's very likely that if people don't understand history, they will think this is just like personal experience. For example, even for like feminism, we think a lot of women from like first world country wouldn't understand what is happening women in third world women in third world country. And we think they wouldn't understand like there are so much difference, for example, between like different like social status. We think like rich women usually would be like indifferent towards like people towards like women that are from like poor background. So we think like it's so important to understand all those nuances. And we think it's so important because like only by understanding the history and the like circumstances that is like suffered by other people who are from real minority, it can they like actually think of the most efficient policy to help all those people from the same minority group. And also we think like it helps to improve the quality of this like social justice movement, because only by now they will know the direction and know what is like the most effective means to like correct this discrimination in the past. But before that, OG.
We don't need academization of like our entire activist circle to be aware of history or some information. These aren't like even about academization, actually.
We think, of course, you need all those like academization. Why? Because, for example, if you're African American, you wouldn't know like how you are discriminated in the past, like why you are discriminated. We think it is like so inefficient for you to just listen to the like story from your grandpa, right? And also we think like personal stories usually appear to be like inconvincing because they think this is like just personal differences. For example, it's just because like you're poor, it's just because like you're from a different race. It's not like particularly because you're women. So we think like this like academization will lead to like generalization for people to understand like they're like systematically discriminated. And second point, why do we think this would make like people inside this minority group feel more supported? Like instead of what OG told you, like because of this academization, they'll feel that, like they're alienated. Because like firstly, we think a lot of people, for a lot of people, the discrimination against them is not like so apparent. We think a lot of times it is like inherent. For example, like for like feminism and for like for example, for feminism, we think a lot of people don't understand like all those things in the past really are like injustice. It's not always so apparent. For example, like the glass ceiling. We think like for a lot of things like sexualization and male gaze, it's not like so apparent. And we don't think like any feminism, even if they're from poor like background, would be offended for the existence of Simone de Beauvoir. We think like exactly because people read all those papers or those books from academia, they would understand like how they're exactly exploited, and they would also understand what's happening elsewhere. And we think people would actually feel more supported. For example, if I am like minority from a poor background, I would actually feel supported when I know that what I'm supporting is not only important for myself, but important for everyone else. And it's also true, like it's like objectively happening. And we think they'll actually be more confident when they can talk in those terminology. For example, they don't actually talk like, oh, they just like look at me in so like so different ways and so in so weird ways. They would actually use the terms of like male gaze and sexualization in order to improve the communication between different individuals in this group, and they would actually know what they're talking about, because we don't think this terminology are just so different, so difficult to understand. And third point is, we think this would actually make the social movement more appealing to outside, because we think there's like basically biases towards like professional opinion, right? So we think like since this the social movement can appear to be like counterintuitive to some people, we think it's important like public would actually listen to them and would actually see them as someone that is supported academically. So if there are like two groups, one said say like we have like all this like scientific approach to prove we are right, and second, the other group just say this is what God said. So we think it's apparent what group would be supported by the general public. We think it's important for like general public to understand like how nuanced and how severe the situation is, and this can only be achieved by academization. And because of that, I'm so proud to oppose.
We'd like to thank that speaker for
Okay, first of all, when academics are used in a proper way with the correct incentive, they do become a useful tool in helping any movement or any of the aims we want to achieve. Yes, that we agree that academics in itself, when used with pure intentions, is a good thing. But what actually occurs in the real world is that in the real world, most of these academicians are incentivized to just do research or just do more research or more debates on just the mainstream issues that are already existing in the world. Why? Because when they do that, that is the only way they receive publicity, or they get their results published in a, even if they have purely scientific incentives. When they do research on topics that are mainstream, that's the only way they get the results published in a journal, or they get on TV. And that's basically the incentive of the academicians, that they do want more publicity. And in an ideal world, that wouldn't be the case. I'll mechanize this further. That is to say, for example, let's take the example of the Black Lives Movement. Now, in an ideal world, each and every movement should get equal importance. That is to say, that if there is a person suffering on one side of the world and there's a person suffering on another side of the world, they both should get equal importance. But that doesn't occur. What occurs in the real world is that when the Black Lives Movement became trending, when academicians get involved, they use these complex phrases. There are two detrimental impacts of this. First, that most people can't understand, and even though they don't understand, people are attracted to these terms because it makes them look intellectuals, even if they don't understand these terms. How this looks like is that when the Black Lives Matters movement started, this BLM movement, even all the pseudo woke people in India, they started protesting against they started supporting the BLM movement, and a whole thing occurred. But the people failed to support the movement, or the people fail to identify the issue of discrimination that's occurring in their own vicinity. That already there are lots of issues that are occurring regarding discrimination or ethnic suppression that are occurring in India right now. People fail to recognize that because it did not get any academician support, and the academicians only supported the mainstream thing that was happening. And because of that, due to this imbalance, or due to this unfair or unjust prioritization of issues by these academicians, it led to very detrimental effects, or it didn't give importance to the movements which actually mattered in that area. Okay, before I go further, are there any POIs? Okay, now what occurs when these mainstream movements are discussed by academicians further and further, that it leads to repetitive, redundant discussions on TV without reaching an actual solution. Apart from that, as my previous speaker already said, there's a principle of reparations, that the people who are fighting, the people who are the initiators of the movement, that is the primary group of people, they are the people to whom the reparations should be paid to. They are the people to whom reparations should be given to, instead of just making them a data, instead of just making them a number and displaying them as a source of entertainment on TV, and using the entire social issue to your own benefit, which is done by the academicians. These people should be provided with reparations. And because of this detrimental effect, or this selfish gains that because of this corrupt incentives, this is wrong, and this mainstream academization of social movements is wrong. Apart from that, what occurs, for example, as the previous speaker said regarding Trump, that when Trump discredited Fauci, his followers also started discrediting Fauci, that also started discrediting COVID. They started saying that COVID didn't exist. And let's face the reality on the ground, that even though we want the world to be ideal, most of the countries, most of the people in the world, or most countries follow a majoritarian leader. You take a look at the largest countries in the world. You can see USA, where more than half the population was in Trump's support. You see countries like Brazil, or in any of these countries where there is a tendency of people to follow the majoritarian leader. When this majoritarian leader discredits a certain individual or academicians, as they tend to do, because usually the facts don't go in the favor of these leaders, when they discredit an academician who is voicing his concerns about a certain issue, the people also discredit that issue. And and because of that, the actual benefit that or the actual rational or proper importance that should be given to the issue doesn't happen. Also, what happens is it turns this each of these issues, right? You take an issue, each of the sufferers have their own life story, they have their own lived experiences, and these are the experiences which should be important, which should be taken into consideration. When there is this mainstream academization of social issues, it converts that into just figures and numbers. And now what this looks like is that if I tell you that, okay, currently we have data that 50,000, I'm just giving an example, please don't take offense, that 50,000 Black people were suppressed or discrimination was done to them. That's another research that discrimination was in the US, and there's another research that 2,000 Asian people were discriminated against in US. What this does is that it removes the value of the discrimination done against those Asian people, and that's another detrimental effect of making mainstream movements popularized, right? So it takes the importance away from that smaller movements, and because of that, those people never get justice. And what occurs in the mainstream movements, that debates will go on national TV, entertainment will go on national TV without reaching to a real conclusion. So even the mainstream movement won't get any real benefit, and other movements will be suppressed, as I said earlier. Okay. What the CEO, why we take it over the other houses, what the CEO tells us that, yes, it makes it more appealing to the public. Okay, it might make it more appealing to the public, but they never proved that why making it more appealing to the public is more important than providing actual reparations or actual benefits to the people who are suppressed or oppressed, or to the people who have started the movement. I don't see why gaining publicity or becoming a source of entertainment is more important than providing reparations to the public. And this is the reason we are very, very proud to propose. Thank you.
We'd like to thank that speaker for the fine speech. Now invite the opposition whip to conclude the case for side opposition.
In today's debate, I really regret to say that I believe that we have houses out there who A, do not know anything about academics, and B, do not know anything about social movements. So let me conclude our case by giving some rebuttals to both houses. Firstly, opening government has come up and say that they believe that academics use complicated words to gain acknowledgement in academics, and they overcomplicate everything and make everything unnecessary. And they believe that this would be used as weapons by the opponents of the social justice movements to attack the movement. But firstly, we believe that under your characterization, academics want acknowledgement and they want a title, and therefore we believe that it's actually very unlikely that they would make up unnecessary and overcomplicated words, because we believe that it is actually more likely for them to gain acknowledgement if they publish something that is understood by many and is actually related to social justice issues, because more people will be interested in them, because they are not about abstract or difficult things, but actually about social justice movements, which is around everybody's daily life. And also, they have not provided a mechanism of how this possible complication of the social justice movements will be used by opponents. We totally do not understand how this will be used by opponents, because it is likely that the opponents will just also level up their counter movements and be more academicized too. And they have also said that they believe that the academization will create like the marginalization of field workers, but we believe that this is so unlikely, because because social justice movements right now are actually often held by grassroots in the society, and they actually really earn for the support of the higher class, social class of the society, because they actually want to have some like big companies, they want billionaires to support them, and they want big figures to support them. We believe that social justice movements actually really want the support of bigger figures, because they believe that this could improve their influence and increase the prospects of them achieving their goals. So therefore, we believe that social justice movements actually seek for the support of people from higher social classes, and therefore they will actually really accept the participation of maybe elite scholars and academics. And it is not likely that this will actually marginalize the field workers, because the field workers will because the field workers will actually the field workers are so strong supporters of these causes, so actually they will be actually kind of willing to learn more difficult concepts to improve the knowledge about this movement that they care so much about. So we also believe that the grassroots as likely look up to academics just like the ordinary intelligent voters, so they actually look up to academics and are very likely to follow them and are more easily persuaded by them. And therefore we believe that it is very unlikely that the field workers will actually be marginalized by the academics, because we also believe that the grassroots will also always be the majority, and it's actually unlikely that the academics and the field workers are mutually exclusive. We believe that it is not the case that the academics and the field workers are mutually exclusive, and we believe that it's a mischaracterization of the case. And we also opening government has also said that the academics will create some elitists and people will shame other people who do not know anything about the theory. We believe that that is so rare because we totally do not understand how this will happen. We believe that it is unlikely that people will shame each other if they support the same social movement. And we also believe that for government's case to stand, they have to characterize the social justice movement is full of people who are not that educated, right? But if so, it is unlikely that academics will become majority. So there is actually no worry of the uneducated people will become marginalized. So again, to conclude my case, to conclude my rebuttals to opening of government, we believe that the academics and the grassroots people and the people who are maybe less educated in the social justice movements are totally not mutually exclusive, and therefore their case does not stand. So moving on to rebuttals to closing government, they have come up and say that the politicians will not. They have come up and let me give some separate rebuttals first. So they have come up and say that politicians will not listen to the academics because politicians generally do not listen to academics, and therefore the participation of academics will not lead to better policies. But we believe that that is so untrue, and they know nothing about politics, because actually a lot of politicians and a lot of governments in the real world, they actually rely on think tanks created by maybe say university professors, etc. A lot of them rely very, very much on academics actually. So we believe that actually if the academics are accepted into social justice movements, so they can have a stake in the social justice movements, they're actually likely to take part in think tanks and influence the government officials and lead to better social policies. So therefore, we believe that engaging academics in social justice movements is actually very important. They have also said that minorities in social justice movements, for example, so also closing government has mentioned like a lot of vulnerable people, for example, like minorities in social justice movements, for example, like worst of women in the feminism movement. But we believe that they cannot prove why this the academization will harm the minority, and we believe that they have only told us that they're very vulnerable, but they have not explained sufficiently why they will be harmed. So to attack closing government's case, we believe that the problem with their case is that they have said that if there is academization, then there will be a lot of data and there will be a lot of discussion and debate, and they believe that this will lead to and this will not lead to the important goal that they want reparation for the oppressed minority. However, we believe that reparation and data, again, they are not mutually exclusive. So actually data is a good basis for reparation. For example, maybe the historians' discovery of like comfort women in the Second World War and the First World War actually lead to a better reparation for the comfort women because people now know about it. So therefore, we believe that actually having data and having a discovery and having history is actually a good thing for leading to reparation to the people who are hurt and to support the social justice movement. So we believe that these two issues are not mutually exclusive, and therefore their case is actually sidetracked. They have also said that these complicated academic phrases that people will not understand, but they will be attracted to them, but they don't really understand what the social movement is going on. And we think that this is a very confusing case which we do not understand. And we believe that data is good for as a basis for the reparation and the achievement of social justice movements. So finally, I have said that if there is academic discussion, then maybe people will be distracted to other issues. For example, if there is a data about how many Black people were oppressed, and then there is also a research on how Asians are discriminated in US, then people will be distracted. But actually the people is just distracted by different social issues. So this is a very normal situation, and that's not about academization at all. So therefore, we believe that today all the harms that the government has raised about academization is actually totally not mutually exclusive with the academization, and therefore their case does not stand. And we have not seen how they have raised really valid reason to oppose the movement. Therefore, we believe that the motion must will fall. Thank you.
We'd like to thank that speaker. That was a fine speech.